In early 1943, Rommel's Afrika Korps launched its final offensive. The Desert Fox had a bold plan: to change the course of the campaign in Tunisia and deliver a final defeat to the Allied forces. But within just a month, he would permanently leave Africa, condemning his armies to captivity. In this video, we will find out why Hitler wanted to hold on to Tunisia and how the final plan of the legendary African campaign ultimately failed, turning Rommel's last battle into a fight to nowhere. By the end of 1942, Rommel's situation had become extremely difficult. After the once-praised Afrika Korps suffered a crushing defeat at the Second Battle of El Alamein, Montgomery's British Eighth Army began pushing the Germans steadily westward. The failure in Egypt resulted not merely in a setback, but in a full-scale collapse. The surviving German and Italian units were forced to flee across the deserts of Libya toward Tunisia. The situation only worsened. The Axis disaster at El Alamein coincided with Operation Torch, the coordinated Allied landings in French North Africa. As a result, Rommel found himself trapped between British forces advancing from the east and Allied troops approaching from the west, moving toward Tunisia in order to cut him off from the last major Axis ports and any possible route of retreat. The condition of Rommel's forces left much to be desired. They were only a shadow of their former strength. Soldier morale after an uninterrupted retreat of more than 2,500 kilometers had fallen to zero. Nearly half of Rommel's men had been killed, wounded, or captured. Rommel himself was exhausted and soon received an offer from Berlin to leave Africa and travel to Germany for rest and recovery. But the Desert Fox did not want to leave Africa on such a bitter note. Rommel sought a way to redeem himself and restore the reputation that had been stained after El Alamein. Fortunately for him, Montgomery's forces slowed their advance and soon ran into the fortified Mareth Line near the old Franco-Libyan border. Allied hopes for a quick victory proved premature. The landing of American forces in Algeria and Morocco not only gave the inexperienced U.S. Army a sense of invincibility, but also drew Hitler's attention to North Africa and Vichy France. Enraged by the near-bloodless surrender of French colonial territories to the Allies, Hitler occupied southern Vichy France and began rushing reinforcements to Tunisia. Within a short time, the entire 5th Panzer Army under General von Arnim was transferred to Tunisia. These timely reinforcements prevented the Americans from easily capturing the Tunisian coastline. Allied Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower proposed delivering a decisive blow between von Arnim's 5th Panzer Army and Rommel's forces, preventing them from linking up and cutting off the Afrika Korps retreat. This was a risky but highly attractive plan that could have ended the fighting before 1943 was even underway. However, British commanders considered the plan too dangerous for the inexperienced American forces and insisted on delaying the offensive until Montgomery was ready to strike from the east. These concerns proved justified. Many American officers had never participated in combat, and training exercises conducted in 1941 revealed shortcomings in coordination, tactics, and infantry training. Even Eisenhower himself noted that some of his officers were overly confident. Rommel, meanwhile, sarcastically referred to the American forces as Italians, hinting at what he believed to be their poor preparation and excessive ambition. The Kasserine Offensive, the defeat of American forces. To escape his vulnerable position, Rommel decided to launch an offensive toward the west. He aimed to push back the American forces before they could initiate their own operation. Together with von Arnim, a two-phase plan was developed. In the first phase, Von Arnim's armored divisions would strike vulnerable U.S. positions around Sidi Bouzid. After that, Rommel would launch the second phase from the Gabes area. After completing their objectives, both generals planned to advance toward Kasserine Pass. On February 14th, von Arnim's forces managed to catch the Americans by surprise near Sidi Bouzid. Rapid strikes by experienced German armored units placed U.S. troops in a dire situation. Facing their first major battle, American forces began losing positions and retreating. Command attempted to reverse the situation by ordering a counterattack, but this decision only made things worse. What had been a relatively organized retreat turned into a rout when the counterattack predictably failed. Exploiting the panic among American units, von Arnim pushed his offensive forward. On February 16th, his forces captured a critical road and supply junction, seizing large quantities of equipment and supplies. American formations continued retreating, abandoning vehicles and depots. For the first time during the African campaign, German forces encountered such disorganized resistance. Rommel's southern forces began their advance only to discover that their primary objective, Gafsa, had already been abandoned. Seeing the chaos and weakness of the enemy, Rommel concluded that a rare opportunity had presented itself. If he coordinated with von Arnim, he could inflict serious damage and possibly even drive the Americans out of Tunisia altogether. Rommel proposed a bold plan, a deep strike toward Tebessa, where Allied headquarters, supply depots, and airfields were located. Success could disrupt supply across the entire Western Front and destabilize Allied defenses. By replenishing fuel from captured depots, his tanks could then advance toward Bonn, encircling all Allied forces in Tunisia. However, difficulties arose. Von Arnim did not share Rommel's optimism. He believed their capabilities allowed only a limited offensive design to delay the Allies and buy time before the inevitable defeat in Tunisia. Unfortunately for Rommel, higher command sided with von Arnim. Additionally, severe supply shortages left Rommel with limited fuel and ammunition. A compromise was reached. Von Arnim transferred tanks to Rommel, but they were to be used only for an attack toward El Kef. Battle of Kasserine Pass. On February 19th, German forces entered the Kasserine Pass, a critical defensive position guarding the route to Tebessa. The offensive progressed rapidly. Supported by artillery and air power, German units smashed through weak American defenses. The pass was captured, and German armored forces advanced deeper, threatening Tebessa and vital Allied communications. The advance exceeded expectations. Emboldened, Rommel decided to split his forces into 3 groups and attack Tebessa, Thala, and Spaiba simultaneously. For a brief moment, it appeared that Rommel's plan was succeeding. The front was cracking. Allied headquarters struggled to maintain control, and rear units prepared for evacuation. But at that moment, the situation abruptly changed. The Northern Armored Division under von Arnim failed to capture Spaiba and was stopped short of the town, eventually retreating 10 kilometers. The decision to divide forces proved disastrous. Although German troops had defeated Allied forces through superior experience and coordination, their numerical inferiority could no longer be compensated. Rommel weakened his striking power. Although German forces briefly reached Thala, this success would be their last. Recognizing the seriousness of the threat, American command rushed in fresh units and called in air support. As Allied airfields became operational, Massive airstrikes were launched against German supply lines. Mountain terrain forced German forces to rely on a limited number of roads, allowing Allied bombers and fighters to devastate the already overstretched columns. By February 22nd, the offensive had completely stalled. The Americans stabilized their defenses around Tebessa and launched counterattacks. Facing the lack of reserves and secure rear areas, Rommel realized he risked losing his entire corps. On February 23rd, the Desert Fox ordered a withdrawal to preserve his remaining forces. The retreat was conducted under extremely difficult conditions. Allied aviation carried out relentless attacks, but despite this, German forces withdrew in an organized manner, preserving most of their equipment and manpower. Nevertheless, Rommel's plan to defeat the Allies in a single decisive blow had failed. The Mareth Line, Rommel's final gamble. The problems did not end there. Due to intensive Allied attacks on supply shipping, by March the Axis forces received only 29,000 tons of supplies out of the required 140,000, while the United States alone delivered 400,000 tons per month. As the situation worsened, Hitler's orders grew increasingly detached from reality. He instructed Rommel to await Montgomery's Eighth Army in Tunisia, entrenched along the Mareth Line. Hitler believed that fortified defenses could turn the battle into a grinding war of attrition. To support Rommel, Berlin promised tanks and reinforcements, but without specifying when they would arrive. Rommel, already disillusioned after the failure at Kasserine, had no choice but to extract the maximum from his exhausted troops. Facing over 800 tanks under Montgomery, Rommel could field barely 200. Losses and fuel shortages had nearly eliminated the Luftwaffe from Tunisian skies, leaving Axis forces without air superiority or even basic air cover. Rommel understood that passively waiting for an Allied assault at Mareth was dangerous. Montgomery continued to amass forces, artillery, and armor, while Allied air superiority allowed unrestricted reconnaissance and strikes against German communications. Instead of static defense, Rommel chose to launch a counterattack to disrupt Montgomery's offensive before it could begin. On the morning of March 6, German and Italian forces, supported by nearly all available tanks, attacked the British Eighth Army. Throughout the day, German armored waves suffered heavy losses. By evening, the offensive had failed completely. The attack that 2 years earlier had driven the British back to El Alamein now collapsed in a single day. By nightfall, Axis forces retreated to their original positions, having lost 55 tanks. The reason was simple. Montgomery knew the attack was coming. British intelligence and ultra-codebreakers intercepted Axis communications in advance. British forces reinforced the front and constructed dense anti-tank defenses saturated with artillery. Instead of surprise, Rommel encountered a prepared enemy that knew exactly where the blow would fall. Rommel's departure and the final catastrophe. After this failure, Rommel lost all faith in the future of the Tunisian campaign. He appealed to Hitler to begin evacuation while it was still possible. Once again, Hitler refused, believing that if Germany abandoned Africa, it would never return. This final offensive weakened already overstretched German forces and produced the opposite effect. After the failure at Mareth, the Axis front began to collapse. Montgomery bypassed the Mareth Line through the Baga Pass, a route the Wehrmacht had considered unsuitable for large-scale operations. While French and British units pinned Axis forces frontally, Montgomery's troops emerged in their rear, threatening encirclement. German forces retreated northward, but this time Montgomery gave them no time to regroup. By April, Axis forces in Tunisia numbered around 300,000 men and only 150 tanks, facing over 500,000 Allied troops and 1,200 tanks. Allied air dominance made air supply impossible. Transport aircraft were shot down, forcing the Axis to abandon aerial resupply. Naval supply routes also suffered catastrophic losses due to air and naval strikes. By the end, for every artillery shell fired by the Axis, the Allies fired 30 in return. After the collapse at Mareth, the front disintegrated. British forces advanced from the south, while American forces pushed from the west, trapping Axis troops in a pocket between Tunis, Bizerta, and Enfidaville. The last attempt at evacuation. In a final attempt to save the situation, von Arnim sent his chief of staff to Berlin to request evacuation. Hitler refused. Only when the situation became completely hopeless did he finally approve evacuation, but by then it was impossible. Any concentration of ships or troops was instantly attacked by Allied aircraft. A second Dunkirk evacuation was out of the question. In late April, German forces made their last stand near Enfidaville. Despite favorable terrain, the outcome was inevitable. On May 7, 1943, British troops entered Tunis. American forces captured Bizerta. On May 13, General von Arnim surrendered with more than 250,000 soldiers, the second largest mass surrender of German forces after Stalingrad. Aftermath and significance. The defeat in Tunisia ended nearly 3 years of Axis warfare in North Africa. Germany lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers, tanks, and aircraft, resources desperately needed on the Eastern Front. While the battle for Tunisia raged, the Red Army was preparing for the Battle of Kursk. Divisions trapped in North Africa instead of reinforcing Army Group Center were captured in May 1943. North Africa became a trap, not only for Rommel but for Germany as a whole. It drained forces and provided nothing in return. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your opinion on what Rommel should have done differently. Also watch our videos on the 2003 invasion of Iraq and the operation that prevented the Allies from taking Berlin. This was Dima. See you soon.